I just want to start by saying I thought the worship this morning was absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Tanya and the team. It was fantastic. It was about a year ago now when Tanya and Joel, Mark and Rachel joined us from a nearby church, and Tim and Laura rejoined us from Faversham, and Will's been getting more involved in the worship now as well. And I just think it's just amazing. We're so blessed to have you. Seriously, guys, really so blessed to have you. It was amazing this morning. Thank you. And happy Mother's Day, by the way, to the mothers. You had some nice cups of tea in bed and maybe some messy versions of scrambled eggs on toast or something. Something like that. Very good. Okay. Right. So about 2,000 years ago, Jesus of Nazareth asked his disciples one very simple question. But rather than being a simple question requiring a simple answer, this question is actually the biggest question in the whole of humanity. This is the question where the answer to which defines Christianity as a whole, and also sometimes, sadly, separates separate fractions of it. This is a question that's as relevant to today's disciples as it was to the original 12. And it's one that searches for a meaning that isn't limited to viewing Jesus in a historical context alone. So let's have a look at it. Okay, lead up to it. Okay, so we're in Matthew 19. In Matthew 19. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. And here's the question. Drum roll, Tim. Joke. There we are. Cheers. So the question is, who do you say I am? I think it's worth just resting on that question for a second. Who do you say I am? He says to his disciples. Now in the moment when this question's asked, Peter rushes in with an answer. I would just say at this point, I absolutely love Peter as a character in the Bible. Peter's, like, we've all got mates, right? A bit like Peter. First one to rush in and say, "Oh, that's a great idea, let's do this." You know, when Jesus walks on water, and they're all amazed, there's a whole storm raging, and he walks on water. And Jesus says, and I do often paraphrase the Bible sometimes, by the way. It's a weakness, I'm sorry, no offence intended. He says, "Lads, who wants to come in next? Who's up for it?" Peter, straight away, me, I'm in. And you can imagine the other disciples standing around there being like, "Mate, you're just about to jump into the sea, what are you doing?" But he's going for it. This is Peter. When Jesus is arrested in Gethsemane, Peter's the first one. He pulls out his sword and he lops off the guard's ear to protect Jesus. First one to do that. And of course Jesus stops him and he calms him down. But I've got no doubt that if the other disciples had also drawn their swords in that moment, Peter would have gone full Braveheart, Game of Thrones, and probably got himself killed. Okay, Peter jumps in first. And in answer to this question, Peter jumps straight in. Next slide. Peter jumps straight in and he says, "You are the Christ." Or, depending on your translation, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Okay? So Jesus has said, "Who do you say I am?" And he jumps in and he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." I just want to make the point here that this moment is one of the seminal moments in Jesus' ministry. Jesus has done some amazing things. They've just seen him feed 5,000 people. He started to talk to them about who he is. But this is the first time it's been explicitly said that he is the Christ, the Messiah of God. Bear in mind, the disciples will have known their Old Testament or the Torah, and they'll have known the prophecies that were given around the Messiah. We know them ourselves. We say them at Christmas, or we sing them in Handel's Messiah. "His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, and the government shall be upon his shoulders." And Peter stands up and he says right here, he says, "You are he. You are the Christ, the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. And it's interesting, actually, that the setting in which this question was asked, I read it earlier on, is a place called Caesarea Philippi. If I just pass it on one more. So Caesarea Philippi is this place where the pagans revered it as a space where they worshipped the god Pan. So Pan is this kind of bestial, kind of pagan god with big horns going back, and the imagery of his horns are linked to how the imagery of Satan's horns were sort of depicted in later years. And in Caesarea Philippi, there are these kind of sort of gate kind of structures in the stone, where the pagans believed this was the gate to the underworld. Okay, so the gates of hell, if you like. And in that underworld were the gods, and who were circulating around this world of death. And it's in this context that Peter stands there before Jesus and says, "You are the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." So think about that in that context. Sometimes when people look at that phrase, "and on this rock I'll build my church," there's a debate whether it's the rock is the revelation in verse 17, whether the rock is Peter himself as the person who would lead the church of Jerusalem. And they're also standing in front of a big rock that symbolises the gates of hell. "On this rock I will build my church." This is really, really powerful stuff. But to come back to the question. So the question is, who do you say I am? And what I'd like us to do now is to all kind of access our inner Peter. Okay? So there's a bit of audience participation here. I'm not sure people look up for it, but anyway, let's try it. If we have a tumbleweed moment, we'll see how we go. So, one word only. One word only. I'd like you to all to speak out. Who do you say Jesus is? Let's do a Peter. One word. Who do you say Jesus is? Go.
Love.
Love. Son of God. Saviour. Pardon? Rescuer. Healer. Friend. I like friend. I like that. I'm coming back to that one. Anyone else? King. Father. Amazing. Amazing. I like friend, actually. I'm going to come back to friend, because some of those words are big, grand words. Like Peter did. The Christ. The Messiah. The big stuff, right? And of course they're brilliant, and he is that. But it's interesting, because the question doesn't ask who is he defined as. The question Jesus asks us is, he says, who do you say I am? And that takes a different edge to it for me, because if you think about, let's say you're at a party, and there's lots of people there that you know, and there's perhaps someone over there who you know very well, and someone says to you, "Who's that guy over there?" The chances are your answer to that question will be who they are in relation to you. You'll say, "Oh, he's my next door neighbour," or "he's a friend from work," or "a friend from back home, that's from school, my brother." You'd say who he is to you. And don't we have a relationship with Jesus? Don't we know him? So I suggest for a second, if we were to answer this question again and we say, who do you say he is? You might have a different answer. Shall we try this again? Shall we try this? I'll give you a chance to say a different word this time. See, friend is one of those I'd put in that category. King, I'm not so sure. Yes, he is king, but who is he to you? So let's try again. One more time. One word. Who is Jesus to you? Pardon? Brother. accessible, a bit tumbleweed. Is this on? Sorry? You're everything. Anything else? Pardon? Dad? Lover of your soul. That's lovely, that. That's lovely. Anyone else? Okay, you've been quiet this morning. Okay, I'm going to do one more thing now. Okay, this is going to try and get you going. Okay, ready for this? Everyone's got to join in. There's no kids around. I was going to say the kids could join in this. Right, we're all going to shout one word. I'm going to go 3, 2, 1, go. And at go, you shout your one word as to who Jesus is. I'm trying very hard here. Ready, let's go. Right, 3, 2, 1. That's nice. That's nice. I got a bit of Jesus back then. Now, there's method to the madness here, right? There's method to the madness here by getting you to shout it all out. Because the question doesn't ask, who do you think Jesus is? The question doesn't ask, who do you think Jesus is? The question asks, who do you say Jesus is? Who do you say I am? And actually, if we were to think that these questions are one that naturally will challenge us, it's that word say that is the one that personally I find the most amount of challenge to. Because I'm quite happy talking about Jesus here, or with any of you guys, or in the IC and that kind of thing, very comfortable. I'm often not quite as comfortable talking about Jesus with people who don't really know Jesus, or perhaps even cynical about Jesus. And actually, if I'm honest, in my life, there's times where I've shied away from it and maybe downplayed it, or maybe not taken the opportunity and it was there. Who do you say? When Jesus says, and I think he challenges me with this question, who do you say I am? I kind of read that as shout from the rooftops. Who do you shout? That's what I actually shout after 3. Who do you say I am? Who do you say I am? I think it's a really important element to it as well. Okay. And then the final 2 words. Who do you say I am? I think further on, I've just capitalised. If you just move the slides on a bit. One more. There we are. I've capitalised it. You notice the difference? Very subtle difference. Who do you say I am? Because when I actually looked at this question, first of all, it was those last 2 words that stood out most for me. Okay? Who do you say I am? Because those words, I am, are words that are extremely powerful in the scripture. One great example of it that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is Moses. When he has to go and stand before Pharaoh. Anyone? Yes, people are sort of nodding a bit know about this, but I'll talk about it anyway. So the situation is this. The children of Israel, the Israelite Jewish race, are all basically in bondage in the Egyptian Empire. In bondage means they're slaves. They're all slaves in the Egyptian Empire. And it's been going on a while, and God speaks to Moses and says, I want you to go and stand before Pharaoh and say, let my people go. As in, release them from bondage. Now, bear in mind, this context is quite a daunting one. In the Egyptian Empire at the time, okay, a pharaoh was not just like a king, not just like an emperor. Pharaohs were thought of as gods in that empire. You go and stand before Pharaoh, you stand before a deity, okay, and be on your knees in front of Pharaoh. You can see it from how they treated the tombs in the pyramids and that kind of thing. So God says to Moses, go and stand before Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. Moses is just a slave himself. He's like, what? Okay. And a bit later on, he ramps it up as well. He says, go and threaten him. Tell him I'm going to send a plague of locusts to ruin your country. And Moses is like, oh, right, okay. Got to go and threaten this God with some pretty nasty stuff. So Moses says basically 2 things to God. He says 2 things. He says, firstly, number 1, can I take my brother Aaron with me? And God's like, yeah, all right, it's fine, take Aaron. Backup, is it? I don't know. Not much backup, but okay, fine, take Aaron, no bother. And the second thing, he says, right, okay, who do I say is actually behind all this? Who do I say, when I stand before Pharaoh, is the person behind that declaration, let my people go? Who do I say that is? And the Lord says to Moses, you tell him that I am has sent you to him. Apologies for the biblical paraphrasing once again. It's a weakness. So, those words I am are huge. They are a declaration of omnipotence, a declaration of strength and might and just everything. Okay, which makes a Pharaoh, who supposedly is really quite important, into nothing but an ant. I am has sent you to him. Okay, and to be honest, it's interesting because these words I am are also used in a really interesting way by Jesus in John. Okay, so this is where Jesus is having a bit of a debate with some of the Jews around who he is. And he says, your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. You are not yet 50 years old, they said to him, and you have seen Abraham. Very truly I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. Okay, again, this is a really important moment in Jesus' ministry, because those big words, I am, that the Lord spoke to Moses and used a few times since in the scriptures, Jesus at that point associates himself with that omnipotent identity. He assumes those words himself and he says, before Abraham was born, I am. And it's interesting when you look at the grammar of that sentence and the tenses, because honestly, before Abraham was born, I am, that doesn't look grammatically correct. And I'm pretty sure it's not Jesus using Black Country dialect either. Because you think it says, before Abraham was born, I was something. But no, what Jesus is saying is that he is past, present and future. Before Abraham was born, I am. Okay? So this is when Jesus asked the question, who do you say I am? I suggest to you that's a timeless question. Okay? And whilst we can think about who Jesus was, the important thing really for me is to focus on who he is now. That glorious identity and that personality that comes with it as well. I think it's worth also recognising that if you think about how Jesus teaches us, he doesn't actually say kind of how things are. He doesn't say these are the rules, these are the facts, these are the state of play. You know, the world's round, not flat. You know, doesn't give any of that kind of information out. He speaks to us in parables. He asks questions. You know, this is a question that I honestly think you could reflect on for every single day. If you just pop the question back up. I think it's the next slide. I think you could reflect on this question every single day for the rest of your life. And just hone in on these 6 words, and a new revelation might come and affect you. And what I would suggest as well is that, you know, a good counsellor, we talked about counselling earlier, will say that actually, you know, the trick isn't to tell the patient what's wrong with them or what they need to work on or anything like that. You ask questions and enable people to come to some form of self-realisation themselves. You provoke and you elicit responses. So I'd like us for a moment to just sit and rest and dwell on this question. Tanya and the worship team, can you come up again? We're going to worship into this in a moment as well. And the key thing I would say here is that when we look into this question, when we look into each part of it, who Jesus is, who do you say he is? Who do you say he is? and the I am bit, who do you say I am? That we will start to see the face of Jesus more and more each time we look into it. And not only will we do that, but the more we look into that question, the more we may end up actually having a better realization of ourselves. Because who Jesus is intrinsically linked to who we are. These words, I am, are massive words that the Lord says in his declaration of omnipotence that Jesus assumes. And these are the ones that we then are able to connect into. Because we also think about who we are. Or should I say who I am in that context. Who do you say I am? Jesus asks you. Who do you say I am?